What happens when the US and Mexico go head-to-head in a trade war? Higher gas prices, skyrocketing car costs, and major disruptions to your daily life. With tensions rising between the two countries, Mexico is threatening to cut off the US's vital oil supply and disrupt the automotive industry, and if that happens, the US economy could be in freefall. But how did we get here, and what does it mean for you? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into the intensifying trade war between the United States and Mexico, a conflict that could have far-reaching consequences for the US economy. With President Trump's recent tariffs on Mexican goods, Mexico is now preparing to retaliate, potentially cutting off oil exports that account for 10% of US crude imports and disrupting the automotive industry with a halt to crucial car parts. These moves could lead to higher gas prices, increased vehicle costs, and massive inflation, all affecting your everyday life. Stay tuned as we break down how this trade war is unfolding and what it could mean for you. It all began when President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Mexico and Canada, citing the need to protect domestic industries and reduce trade imbalances. The reality? This policy is threatening to disrupt vital supply chains that the US depends on. For example, Mexico supplies 27% of the US's crude oil imports, around 1 million barrels per day. If Mexico decides to halt its oil exports, gas prices in the US could skyrocket, causing a ripple effect across the economy. This disruption would not only cause inflation, but could potentially lead to a $2.5 billion loss per day in economic output, according to some estimates. Additionally, the automotive industry could suffer significantly. Major US automakers such as Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler rely heavily on parts manufactured in Mexico. According to the US International Trade Commission, $66.3 billion worth of automotive parts are imported from Mexico every year. A disruption in this supply could result in higher vehicle production costs, causing vehicle prices to increase by $3,000 to $11,000 depending on the model and market. The automotive sector could see massive layoffs if production lines come to a halt due to the tariff dispute. In addition to oil and car parts, Mexico is a significant exporter of agricultural products like corn, soybeans, and beef. These are staple exports from the US to Mexico, and if Mexico retaliates by imposing tariffs on these products, it could devastate US farmers, especially in states like Iowa and Nebraska, where corn and soybean farming are key industries. According to USDA data, Mexico is the third largest market for US agricultural exports, buying over $18.1 billion worth of US farm goods annually. If tariffs go into effect, American consumers will feel the impact. Grocery prices for products like beef and corn could rise, affecting everyday life. The US and Mexico aren't just exchanging trade blows. Behind the scenes, both governments are trying to negotiate their way out of this conflict. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has taken a relatively diplomatic stance but has made it clear that Mexico is prepared to retaliate. Talks between Obrador and President Trump are scheduled, and the outcome of these discussions could be the deciding factor in whether the two countries can avoid a full-blown trade war. The issue is complicated because Mexico's domestic support for tough actions against the US has grown. A recent report from Kira News highlighted that over 80% of Mexicans oppose US plans to deport migrants or impose tariffs. If negotiations fail, Mexico could impose retaliatory tariffs on key US agricultural goods, disrupting US exports worth billions of dollars. In the worst-case scenario, Mexico could even blacklist major US companies, making it harder for American businesses to operate in Mexico. For companies like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, this would be a devastating blow, potentially leading to increased manufacturing costs and disrupted supply chains across North America. President Trump's America First policy is central to his trade strategy. The idea is simple: impose tariffs on foreign goods to protect US industries, especially steel and aluminum, and reduce reliance on foreign suppliers. The US economy is increasingly dependent on international trade, but the idea is to push for greater domestic production and less foreign competition. However, in practice, the US automotive industry heavily relies on parts from Canada, Mexico, and Asian countries. In 2022, Mexico accounted for over 40% of all US motor vehicle parts exports, marking the first time since 2014 that a single nation reached this level. If Mexico's supply of auto parts were disrupted, the resulting production delays and cost increases would hurt the U.S. automotive industry, potentially forcing manufacturers to move production back to the U.S. While this sounds good in theory, it would likely result in much higher costs due to the higher labor costs and environmental regulations in the U.S. compared to Mexico and Canada. A study from the Center for Automotive Research showed that moving all car production back to the U.S. would cost an additional $7.4 billion annually, with an average car price increase of $4,400. Additionally, wages in the U.S. are much higher than in Mexico. U.S. car factory workers earn about $25 per hour, compared to $5 to $6 per hour for workers in Mexican plants. This cost disparity makes it economically unfeasible to rely solely on U.S. manufacturing in the short term. In fact, the U.S.'s dependence on international supply chains extends far beyond cars. The electronics industry is also feeling the pressure. 70% of microchips used in U.S. electronics are sourced from Asia, particularly South Korea and Taiwan. Raising tariffs on these countries will increase costs for consumers across all electronic goods. Whether it's smartphones, laptops, or home appliances, the price tags are about to climb. U.S. consumers will feel the pain as higher production costs are passed on to them. Canada, often seen as the U.S.'s most important trade partner, is not standing by as the U.S. imposes tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has stated that Canada will respond immediately if the U.S. continues its tariff policies. And respond. Canada did Phase 1 of Canada's retaliatory strategy involves a 25% tariff on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods. Key products affected will be consumer items like food, clothing, and household products, which will directly impact U.S. consumers. Phase 2 will hit even harder, targeting core American industries like automobiles and steel. Canada has already said it plans to impose tariffs on cars, parts, and even electric vehicle (EV) batteries, the materials for which are heavily sourced from Canada. If this occurs, the U.S. automotive industry could be in deep trouble. According to industry experts, vehicle prices could rise by anywhere between $3,000 and $11,000. Canada also has significant leverage in the energy sector. Canada is the largest supplier of crude oil to the U.S., with nearly 50% of U.S. oil imports coming from Canada. If Canada decides to cut off its energy exports in response to the tariffs, U.S. energy prices would skyrocket, affecting gas prices and energy costs for consumers. In fact, refineries in the U.S. are specifically built to process Canadian crude oil from Alberta's oil sands, making it a crucial part of the U.S. energy infrastructure. If that supply were to end, U.S. consumers would face higher energy prices almost immediately. So, how do these trade moves affect you directly? Let's break it down. First off, higher prices are inevitable. Food prices will rise due to the tariffs on agricultural products, especially beef, corn, and soybeans. Experts predict a 10 to 15% rise in grocery bills over the next year if tariffs persist. Imagine paying $100 more a month just for basic items like meat, corn products, or soy-based goods. The automotive industry is another place where consumers will feel the pain. Car prices could climb between $3,000 and $11,000 depending on the make and model, especially for mid-range cars and electric vehicles. The prices for appliances, like refrigerators, microwaves, and washing machines, could also rise as manufacturers deal with increased material costs from tariffs on steel and aluminum. Additionally, the U.S. energy market could face higher gas prices due to disruptions in oil imports from Mexico and Canada. According to the Energy Information Administration (EIA), if these critical supplies were cut off, U.S. fuel prices could jump by up to 20%, leading to a significant spike in transportation and living costs. The rise in fuel prices will not only make your commute more expensive, but it will also affect shipping costs, making goods more expensive across the board. As we've explored, the U.S.'s protectionist tariffs are far from simple. The global economy is deeply interconnected, and when one country imposes tariffs, the consequences ripple across industries, nations, and everyday life. U.S. consumers are set to feel the consequences of rising prices, and U.S. businesses are at risk of losing key trade partners like Mexico and Canada. The question now is whether these measures will lead to greater economic self-sufficiency or whether they will cause serious disruption for the U.S. economy. What do you think will happen next? Will this tariff policy strengthen U.S. industries, or will it backfire, hurting the very people it's meant to protect? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you found this video informative.
Response might result in inconsistent pricing and supply chain disruptions across member countries. Consumers could see a rise in the cost of everyday items from home appliances to automobiles as businesses adjust to the new trade realities. Recent consumer price index data across the EU shows an average inflation increase of around 2.5% attributed directly to these trade tensions. Additionally, uncertainties in the market might lead to decreased consumer confidence, which in turn can reduce spending and slow economic recovery in local communities. Chapter 5. Potential outcomes. One possibility is that the U.S. remains steadfast in its protectionist stance, leading to a full-blown trade war. This could trigger a cascade of retaliatory measures, with U.S. industries facing higher raw material costs and consumers experiencing increased prices. The International Monetary Fund projects that a prolonged trade war could reduce global GDP growth by 0.5 to 1% over the next 2 years. U.S. consumers might see an annual price increase of 2 to 3%, and job losses in key sectors could exceed 100,000 across North America and Europe. Alternatively, there is hope for a temporary compromise. In this scenario, the U.S. could ease or postpone the 25% tariff on European automobiles, while Germany, Canada, and the EU refrain from immediate retaliatory measures. Economic models suggest that such a compromise could boost global trade growth by 1 to 2% in the short term. However, while this may stave off immediate economic fallout, the underlying issues would remain unresolved. A third possibility is prolonged diplomatic negotiations, influenced by the upcoming U.S. elections in 2025. While continued dialogue might ease immediate tensions, extended uncertainty could lead to a contraction in industrial production by 1 to 1.5% over the next 18 months. As investors remain cautious and businesses delay long-term planning, for everyday people, the difference between these scenarios could mean the difference between economic stability and uncertainty. In a full-blown trade war scenario, consumers could face higher prices on everything from gasoline to groceries, with inflation potentially accelerating and household budgets becoming strained. In contrast, a temporary compromise might allow prices to stabilize and give consumers a brief reprieve from rising costs. However, the lingering uncertainty from prolonged negotiations could mean that businesses delay hiring or expansion, leading to slower job growth and fewer opportunities for wage increases. Recent consumer surveys indicate that nearly 50% of households in both the US and Europe are concerned about the long-term impact of these trade disputes on their cost of living and employment prospects. Chapter 6. Broader geopolitical implications beyond immediate economic impacts. This trade dispute has significant geopolitical implications that could reshape global alliances and redefine trade norms. For decades, the United States has leveraged its economic clout and diplomatic soft power to dictate the terms of international trade. However, the coordinated responses from Germany and Canada hint at a potential realignment of power dynamics. Such shifts in global power can influence everyday life by altering the stability of markets and the predictability of international supply chains. When major economies realign, new trade agreements and partnerships emerge, potentially leading to changes in the availability and price of goods, ranging from electronics to everyday consumables. With new alliances forming, companies may also shift production to different regions, which can affect local job markets and consumer prices. As we reach the end of our deep dive analysis, it's clear that the unfolding trade dispute between the United States, Germany, and Canada, and its broader implications for the European Union, represents a pivotal moment in global trade. The aggressive tariffs imposed under the America First agenda have triggered a cascade of reactions, challenging long-standing trade norms and alliances, ultimately affecting the everyday lives of millions of people around the world. Whether we face a prolonged trade war, a temporary compromise, or extended diplomatic negotiations, the stakes are enormous. Billions of dollars in trade value, millions of jobs, and the stability of our daily lives hang in the balance. The potential for higher prices, reduced consumer confidence, and changes in local job markets are all very real outcomes that could affect each of us. With the 2025 US elections on the horizon and global uncertainties mounting, the coming months will be critical in determining the future of international trade and economic stability. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these developments. Do you believe that the coordinated actions by Germany and Canada can reshape US trade policy, or will domestic political pressures ultimately prevail? How do you see these changes impacting your daily life? Let us know in the comments below.